This is the combined chapters of 7 and 9, the Industrial Revolution. This is discussion 4, the expansion of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution did not stay in Great Britain. Other people and other countries saw what Great Britain was doing as it was greatly increasing its productive capacity, and they wanted to enjoy some of the same ideas themselves. And Belgium picked up the torch first, then followed by France, and then parts of what we later become known as Germany began to industrialize and began to catch up with Great Britain, primarily because Great Britain, as the experimentation, as they were just getting started, had made mistakes just like anyone else would, and a lot of what their mistakes were able to be avoided by Belgium, France, and those parts of Germany because they learned from those mistakes. And on top of that, the home countries of France and Germany and Belgium had incredible wealth of raw materials themselves, so that they were able to feed their industrial machine for energy and power. Now, the Eastern and Southern Europe were very slow to industrialize for a few different reasons. First of all, there was not a huge effort to try to invest in these areas for productivity, and so without that startup capital, it really did not come around. Didn't have a lot of raw materials to create and run the machines, and the political situation was always iffy in Eastern and Southern Europe. And that iffiness is what discourages people from putting large amounts of money in investment in a factory or in tools, because if the political situation is going to change and all of a sudden you have a war and your factory got destroyed, you're not getting paid back for it. And so people like to establish their factories in well-known political situations as well. Now, the increase in productivity produced a lot more goods at significantly lower prices. And so these countries that started uh, Great Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, the Dutch, they were able to make a whole bunch of money selling their stuff at a lower price than what was going on in Eastern and Southern Europe. So even if they had tried, they would not have been able to make that profit because of the startup costs was going to be hard for Eastern and Southern Europe to get caught up. Now, a lot of different things came about through the Industrial Revolution other than just machines. A guy by the name of Bessemer developed a better way to make steel from iron, which was a much better metal for construction and for other industrial uses. A guy by the name of Alfred Nobel developed dynamite to aid in construction. However, that was not the only use for the dynamite, and Alfred Nobel discovered that several countries were using his invention of dynamite as a weapon of war, which he wasn't too thrilled about. In fact, he felt guilty about what these countries were doing with his invention. So he decided to take pretty much all of his royalties from the invention of dynamite to sponsor an award for people to use his invention less. This is known as the Nobel Peace Prize. We have a guy by the name of Faraday who invented the dynamo, which essentially is a way to produce electrical power anytime you want instead of hoping for a water wheel to turn, waiting for some static electricity. Another very important idea with the Industrial Revolution, though, is the idea of interchangeable parts. See, up until this point, all the machines, even the early Industrial Revolution machines, were all parts that were made specifically for that machine. And so if something broke, they would have to go back and redesign, refashion, and then recreate these pieces. And that got to be significantly expensive. But if we say, okay, I want a 2-inch bolt that's got a hex top on it, we go to the uh, hardware store and we get exactly what we need, and that will fit many different ideas. And that's what the beauty of the interchangeable parts were, is that if a singular part broke, we could just essentially go to a manufacturer and say, I want this exact thing, and they would be able to do it without having to come to the machine, measure, and then fashion it, come back, test it. Oh, not quite right. And it made the whole process a lot easier and predictable. Also, the invention of the assembly line, which goes with the idea of interchangeable parts, is that instead of one person having to figure out how to do all the different steps in order to create these very complicated machines like a car, uh, or refrigerators or machine or other type machines, is that someone had to learn one or two steps, be very good at those one or two steps, and then they'd simply, instead of moving the people to the machine, they would move the machine to the people, and that would actually increase the productivity, and it would also drive down costs as well. Uh, Now, not only do we have these new innovations, but we also have to get the innovations to people. The idea of the transportation greatly changed during the Industrial Revolution. The idea of having a predictable way to get from point A to point B without having to worry about feeding a horse or the manure or anything else like that was the idea of the automobile. Nicholas Otto developed the internal combustion engine, which was extremely important because steam engines can have a larger tendency to explode. And not only to explode, but they create a tremendous amount of heat, which is kind of uncomfortable for people who are near it. And the internal combustion engine created also a lot more power in order to propel larger vehicles. Carl Benz of Mercedes Benz developed the first automobile to transport people. Gottlieb Daimler developed the first four-wheel automobile. And then, of course, you know about Henry Ford, but remember, Henry Ford did not invent cars. He did not invent anything really about cars. He simply applied the idea of the assembly line to the manufacturing of automobiles and made them significantly less expensive than what they were previous to that. And with the United States, with how far spread we are from each other, the idea of the automobile was a significant change for the United States. The Wright brothers designed the first airplane, and the motorized flight, really big deal. But what the Wright brothers are significant for, even through today, is not only did they have uh, powered flight, but they had developed how to steer an airplane while in flight. And that's one of their big contributions. Samuel Morse developed a telegraph in order to send messages long distances without having to have people on horses take the messages for rides. And developed the idea that we could have instantaneous communication with the idea of the Morse code. And then we got to wireless communication, where Marconi developed the use of the radio, where people could relay messages that way. Now, when we have all these big businesses and we have them producing lots and lots of stuff, there's lots and lots of money going on. And sometimes the businesses needed to expand even more than what their sales could bring about. And so they started creating themselves into corporations with the sale of stock, where they would say, I will give a percentage of my company to you, you give me money, and then we're going to build new factory and take over everything in our industry. And so a lot of these corporations gained large amounts of capital to build large factories, who had large workforces, and then they essentially would do everything they could to dominate a particular industry. Many corporations would buy out smaller competitors to create monopolies so that they would have complete control over prices and make considerable amount of profits, and to take care of some of the insecurities about whether they'd be able to stay in business or not. One of the experts at this gobbling up smaller competitors was John D. Rockefeller, who bought up a lot of the petroleum companies, and that is what became Standard Oil. Of course, Standard Oil became one of the first targets of antitrust legislation in the early 1900s. Now, if a company could not form a monopoly because they couldn't get everyone to buy into it, or they simply were just too diffuse and it's hard to get everything to work together, a lot of times corporations would work together to establish prices, and they'd even say, okay, you are allowed to sell to this person, and I promise I won't try to sell to them, and then you can sell to this person. They set prices, and acting as a cartel, different producers working together to establish prices and productivity. Uh, Governments were often saying, hey, this doesn't work for us. The American way or the capitalist way, not just in the United States, works best when people compete for business, and because they're going to try to make their product better than the other ones so that you want to buy their product. They're going to work hard to be efficient so they can have lower prices, and those lower prices are what to encourage you to buy from them instead of from someone else. And so governments were often asked to step in and stop these anti-competitive practices as businesses were doing anything they could in order to reduce competition, which means they didn't have to worry about lower prices, better product quality, or even innovation into new stuff because they were making money and they were happy doing it. Concludes discussion number 4, the expansion of the Industrial Revolution. It is a part of the combined chapters of 7 and 9, the Industrial Revolution.